What's up, everybody, and welcome to our seventh Java tutorial. And your host is Theo Morex, the coder. So, yeah, without any further ado, let's get started. Actually, this is one of my favorites. Cool. So, in this tutorial, we're gonna be discussing or dealing with, or we're gonna be handling objects, all right, or uncovering objects. If you take a little bit step back and check at the string data type, right? When you define a string, you define it as a variable, right? You say string and then you have a variable name, right? And then you give it a value. What do you think we were actually doing there? Yes, we were declaring an attribute or a variable, but there's a special name, or it has a name, an appropriate name. Because remember, whatever string we created, we also discussed some few methods that you accessed in that variable, right? Where were those methods coming from? We had the one for making our cases uppercase, lowercase. How were we doing all that? If you might have asked yourself. Anything? Cool. I do hope you get the answer. I do hope you got to answer. But what a string is actually an object, right? And one thing that you wanna understand first is to understand what an object is. Then it becomes easy relating to what you've already dealt with, right? So an object is an instance of a class, right? Meaning that if you check from our string, right, we start with the class name string, though in the previous discussion we said that this is the data type. It's the data type of this class, and that class is a string, right? So you have a class name and then you have the name of that class. By you having just a class name and the name of that okay, let's just reverse it back, right, to our discussion of data types. When you want to define, or when you want to create a variable with a string value, you start with the class name, which is a string, or you start with the data type name, which is a string, and then you get to have the name of that string, right? And then you assign it a value. But then looking on the left side of it, that string is actually a class. And in Java, to easily spot a class, or to easily name a class, all classes are written with first uppercase letter for the first word, right? If it's a string, it will have the capital letter M. Just as you've seen with my examples, I normally call my classes Morex, right? I create Morex class. So my M is always a capital letter. In some instances, I use Morex decoder. Nonetheless, I just kind of like interchange the names, use them somewhere, somehow, and all that. Because it's fun to actually code using names and the names that you know. But yeah, let's not get off course in focus on what we have here, right? So when you declare a string, you give it a name, right? So you're basically creating an object of that string class, and that's how you are able to use that object name to access the methods that you defined inside that class. Like I said, some of the things won't make sense from the word go, but then you will see as we go further how it all goes, right? So cool. Let's look at the syntax, and then we'll further explain the whole object thingy, or the object concept through coding, which will make it easy to understand. Just like in Python, if you've seen Python, you have a string, right? Of course, in Python, you just create any variable and then you assign it a value. If you assign it a string value, then that variable is declared as a string type, right? And then if you just take that variable and say dot, if you're on an IDE, you'll be able to see all the methods associated with that variable. So basically that variable is an object, right? It's a string object. I do hope that you get to understand, or if you're not, then don't worry, we're going to explain it through and then you will see as we create an object just now. Cool. So the syntax is you start with the class name and then you have an object name. So far we have seen this. If you recall, we have a string. So it's a string and then you have the name of that string, right? That's what we have dealt with so far. But then say you want to create a new object, right? You want to create a new object of a certain class, right? You want to create a new object. So one thing that you're going to understand further is that after we discussed about these objects, I think next week we're going to start discussing about classes and constructors, and then it's going to make sense in terms of why or how was the string class developed, right? It's going to make sense when we move further to our our discussion, right, of classes, because once you get to discuss classes, then it will be easy for you to understand these whole objects, right? I know I'm starting with just an object of something because I wanted to focus more on not really classes but creating an object. So basically it's creating an object of your class, but the main purpose was to focus on methods which are objects to a class, right? Instead of them being members of a class, but they are objects. So basically, in terms of the access modifiers, previously we used static, and then static means that this method is a member of this class. So you don't have to create an object of the class in order for you to access the method. You just use it as it is, right? That's what we discussed previously in terms of methods. What we're going to do now, we're going to discuss methods which are objects to a class. And to create an object, you start with the class name and then you're going to name your object, and then it's an assignment operator, and then you have a new keyword because you want to create a new object, and then the name of your class, and then you're going to enclose so now your class is going to have parentheses, and this part has to do with constructors. If you don't have any constructor, it's going to be like this. Even if you have a constructor but your constructor doesn't have any parameters, it's going to be like this. But if your constructor has a parameter, you will see a parameter there. So we'll discuss the constructors in the next tutorial along with classes, and then you will get to understand this. For now, it's just objects, and in this tutorial we'll focus more on just creating objects and then accessing methods in our same class. So I don't want to go that further of creating a different class in Critical because I haven't started discussing about classes, right? We're going to discuss about that in the next tutorial, and I do hope you guys are not lost at this point and you're following through what I'm saying, right? So cool. So say we have a class name or X decoder, right? So basically this is just the class that we're going to create in the application just now. So if you want to create an object of this class, what you're gonna do is you're just gonna call the class. This is the class name, right? So Rex decoder, and then you have the object. So mostly the object is just it's written in lowercase of your class. So you have a string, right? A string with a capital letter S, and you can just name that string as string, like in small cases, and that's gonna be the name of the object. In this case, I just changed the case for M to lowercase, and then I have it there, and I left everything as it is. And then what we have there is new, and then that's Morex decoded. That's basically how you define a object. Cool. Now what I'm gonna do now is we're gonna go through the coding side and make everything easy to understand, or make everything make sense, because right now what we have so far, it doesn't really make sense at all. So cool, mkdir objects. There we go. We have our directory, and let me just also change the directory there, because that's where we're going to be compiling, and this is where we're going to write our program, right? So we're going to create the class called Murex. That's murex.java, and we have ourselves our class, right? And then we're going to declare that class. So we're going to start creating that class. So I'm going to discuss this in the next tutorial. And then what we have is it's public static void main. Cool, that's what we have, right? So previously, if we were to just recap, static Murex, right? Let's just say that's that. Or maybe let's just also create an object there. And then it's print forgot system.out.print line, and then we have something called name, and then I have name. There we go. And then we just call it the Murex, and then we pass in Murex the coder, right? It's just a simple program. Oh, I messed up there. This has to be out there. There we go. Let's move this tab there. There we go. And then we have, there we go, and then it's Javek. This is just me creating my play button, and there we go, Murex decoder, right? And that's what we did previously. So we defined a method which is a member to a class. Today what we want to do is we want to define a method, but not using the static access modifier, but a public access modifier. If I define a method and use a public access modifier, I'm making my method, I'm declaring a method which is a member to, no, it's not a member to a class, but it's an object to that class. I hope you guys understand what I'm saying. So in that case, or in that instance, if I define it like that, then I have to first create an object of this class, then I will be able to access this method. So this method is not a member of this class. If it's a member of this class, you just call it as it is without actually creating an object. But to access a method that is defined with the public access modifier, you have to create an object. You have to create an object of your class first, right? To do that, let's quickly just do it here. It's public. Let's do some maths, and then it's add, and then I have A, I have B, right? And then what I'm gonna do is return, like when you have an int type, you remember we discussed as to the keyword, right? For void is when your function doesn't return any value. If it returns a specific value, if you want to return a value, you specify the type of value that you want to return. If it's a string, it's a string. In this case, it's just an integer. And then I'm just gonna return the sum, so which is a plus b, right? And then say I go to my main function, and then I call the add method directly. If I call the add method directly, say add, then I have two parameters, say 50 and 50. It returns a value, so I want to print out that value. So let's just say we have some and then we have that, right? Let's see what our compiler is gonna say. So our compiler is gonna complain. Why? Because what we create is an object or a method of public access modifier and is not of a static type, right? So basically we created a method which is not a member to this class, right? And what we have is we have a method which is not a member to the class. So we have to create an object of the class, then we will be able to access that method. So basically the main method, which is always run whenever you run your program, is a member of that class. So you don't have to call that method, right? Because if you remember, our definition of a method is that it's a block of code that only gets executed when called, right? If you don't call that method, it's not going to get executed. But our main method, which is the main or the core of our Java program application, it runs by default upon running the application, right? So whenever you compile the program, the main method gets called. It is possible to create a class that doesn't have a main method, but you use it where you have your main method, and we'll discuss about that in the future tutorials. But in order for us to be able to do that or run that method, we have to create an object of whatever class that has the methods that we want to use. In this case, since this is the class, the same class with the main method has a method which is an object, which is not a member to this object, which is not a member to this class. I'm messing up the concepts there. I do apologize. It's Monday morning. So yeah, basically what we're doing here is that we're going to create an object of our class, and then we will be able to access the methods in our class. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to start right here, right? So I think let's do it just there. Cool. So create an object of Murex class, right? To do that, you call the class name, right? That's the class name. Then I define the object. As I've said previously, you can just use the lowercase of that object, or you can give it a more descriptive name. That depends on you. In this case, I'm just gonna call it Murex class. And then I have the keyword new, and then I have Murex, and then I have parentheses, and I have that. And that's my method. And in order for me to access that method add, I just have to come there and I type in the name of my object and then dot. So dot is you accessing all the methods inside that class, and once you select your method, it's gonna call the method that is appropriate. Now if we are to run this, let's see how our compiler is gonna do. Print line. Okay, I made a mistake there. I have been working too much with the C languages. I think it was C#. So I have to change this. This has to be system dot out dot print line. So it's a system class which has a member out, and then there's a method print line, right? It also makes sense with this, right? So you have a system which is a class, and then you have a member. So we're going to also discuss about the these members to a class, because you can actually call a class name, and then inside that class, if you have members which are if you have members in that class, you can just directly call those members, right? We'll discuss about that in the future tutorials. Let's clear this, and we run our program, and there we go. Our program runs as it should. For instance, if we were to remove this again, and we see the error that we're gonna get there, just like I said, don't be afraid of getting errors. Now you see that it gives you the direct error, and because previously we were getting an error of that we are trying to print, or we're using a method that doesn't exist in our program, it's not identified, right? But then now the error that we're getting is that a non-static method cannot be referenced from a static content. So even if you get to a part where you create a method that relies or it wants information from a different method, right? If it's a static method and you're calling a method, and you're calling a public method, a non-static method, inside that method, you're going to get an error, which means that you have to first create an object, and then you'll be able to access that method. You'll be able to call that method within the static method. Just like a public method, right? If you call a static method inside a public method, there are chances of you getting an error, or there are chances of you not getting an error. Which one is going to be the case? I wanted to ask this. I wanted to say it, but then I didn't want to do it because I want you guys to also explore. Just as I mentioned, the easier way to learn is to explore. And by exploring, it's you just figure, okay, cool, what happens if you do this, what happens if you do this. I am going to give you more details of this in the next tutorial. In this case, that's basically it. That's the method and that's the object. I hope you guys did understand what we just did, right? An object is an instance of a class, meaning that an object gives you the ability to access methods inside a class. Now, we have spoken about variables, right? So just like in this case, right? So let me also not limit it to just methods. Say we have attributes. So a class has attributes which are more like variables. So you can declare variables outside the main method. Previously, we have declared the variables, but inside the main method. Now, say we just want to create a string name, and then we just call it Java, right? And then we have a char letter, and then we just call it a. Cool, that's what we have, right? So these are attributes. These are attributes of the class, or you can call them variables, but mostly when you're dealing with classes, we just call them attributes of a class. And then I can just print them out there. So let's see, display attributes. Cool. So system dot out dot print line, and then we have name, right? That's the attribute name. And then we have system dot out dot print line, and then we have letter, and then we have letter, right? Let's compile this and see what's gonna happen. We made a mistake there in terms of our add. We have to take it back there. So it's Rex. There we go. And then let's clear this in our run button. There we go. We have Rex A and B, right? That's what we have, right? Those are attributes of ours there, right? We just declare them as they are. But then if we come here and we create them as objects and not members of this class, we can just give them public, and then we call them public, right? And then if I run them now, our compiler is gonna complain, right? Why? Because we are trying to access objects of a class as if they are members of the class. So in order for us to access them, we're going to use the object that we created, and that will make us understand why the object and what the object, or what kind of abilities, or what kind of access the object has, or what the object allows us to access, right? So if I say murex dot name, and then I say murex dot letter, right? And then I clear this, and then I run this. Still give us a problem. Why? What did we do? This attribute, so we define them inside there. Made a mistake. I didn't even notice. So I define them inside our static main. Cool. So let's revisit what we just did, right? So we have a string name Java, and then we have a char letter, and then it's a and then let's scroll down and let's do this. So we defined our variables the same way we're doing before, so that's why our program ran first time. So let's run it again, and you will see that we cannot reference a non-static variable in there. So if you wanted to access the methods as they are, you will make them members of this class by using the keyword static. So you use static, and you use static, and then if I was to run them now, everything runs as accordingly. But then if you wanted to make them objects of a class and not members of a class, you would have the word public there instead of static, or you can just leave them as they are, and then you come down there. Since you already have an object of this class, that object allows you to access any method inside the class and attributes. So that's murex dot, and then if you run that, everything runs as small, right? You could have chosen to put public there, it would have worked the same way, but then there's something that I also want to emphasize. Most people get too confused. You get public, right? You can use, you saw with our main method, right? It has public static, right? So you say in public, it's accessible to any class. So we'll talk about the access modifiers properly, as to how do they differ and what kind of restriction do they give. If it's a method and you give it and you define it as a public method, how accessible it is outside this class. Some has to deal with packages, so we'll talk about this in the future tutorials. I just hope that you guys did enjoy this tutorial and you guys understood. Just as I've said, at first it's not easy to fully understand something, but then you have to keep going and keep on doing and doing and doing and doing, and eventually it becomes easy to understand. I shall see you guys in the next week's tutorial.